So now that we have the basic functionality of our Flappy Bird game going on by whiteboxing the player, obstacle, and ground sprites, the next step is to spawn multiple versions of our obstacle using a prefab. And then from there, we want to add a score. So before we make our prefab, I want to add another sprite into here that's going to trigger the score happening. So I'm going to go into my sprites folder and make another. Let's undo that. Let's make another sprite here. And we'll just make it into a rectangle or square. And let's call it score. And let's put square onto here. That's going to basically match up to the space between my obstacles. And while we're here, let's go ahead and add some physics to it. So let's add a rigid body 2D. And we'll add a box collider. So this will be kinematic. We don't want gravity being applied to it. And we're going to make this collider a trigger. So as we go through it, it's going to trigger that we've entered it. And we don't actually want to see it, so we're going to turn the sprite renderer off. And so we have this in here as score. We'll go ahead and put it inside of our obstacle. And then we're ready to make our obstacle into a prefab. So let's take our obstacle and drag it down into our sprites folder. Let's get rid of this guy that I inadvertently put in there. Okay. So we have our obstacle put in here. Now we can go ahead and play this. I'll save it first. And it's moving right there. Okay, good. All right, so that works, but now we need to spawn this. So we will set up a game controller like we've done before. I'm going to call this game controller. And we will add a new script to this called game controller. Now, if you had done the drop game, or the catch game that we did last time, we can actually bring over that exact script. But I'm going to go ahead and type that in just so that if we come to this from a fresh start without that code, we can do that as well. So in here, we want to know what we're controlling. So we're going to put public game object, and let's just call this obstacle. Now, if you're bringing over the 2D catch game, that was called ball, and you could just leave it as ball if you wanted to, or you can change the name of it. Just make sure if you change the name in one place, you change it everywhere else. Okay, so we will create a new coroutine in here. So we're going to put numerator, and we'll call it spawn. This is what we're going to use to actually spawn our obstacles. And when we spawn it, we're going to put in a while loop that checks for how much time is left. So it doesn't go on forever. We can say so long as time left is greater than 0. And I'll go ahead and label that end of that while. So we know what we're doing as we're going along here. We need a variable for time left. Okay, which we can change as we're going along here. So long as time left exists, what do we want to do? Well, we want to spawn our game object. We need to know where we're spawning it. So we're going to set up a vector 3 for that. Call it spawn position. So vector 3 would have 3 variables. So for right now, we're just going to spawn it in the middle so we can see what that looks like. And then we're going to create that actual instance of our obstacle. So we're going to say obstacle. That's what we're spawning. And we're going to spawn that in the spawn position. And we're going to spawn that with this quaternion identity. And that basically says we have to specify what the rotation is. And for us, there's no rotation. It's going to be exactly as it is. Now, after this, this is why we're an IE numerator, so that we can pause. Let's put yield return, and we'll put a new wait 4 seconds, and we're going to put, let's say, 1. So that means we're just not going to spawn them continuously. We're going to wait a period of time to do that. And because we want time left to go down as our game plays, let's go into update, and let's subtract time.delta time. So as our game progresses, it will actually reduce that time as we're going along. Doesn't like that this is an int, I think, so let's go up and change this to float. And that ought to fix that up. Okay, good. So let's see what we've done here. We've come into here. We have our game controller. Where is our game? Yeah, let's call this game controller. Okay, and then we have our obstacle. That's going to be our prefab here. So let's just pull our prefab over to here. What did we get here? There we go. We click on game controller and then drag over our prefab, and we need some time here to be going along, and let's just see what happens. Now, if you click on your scene, you can actually see what's going on in the whole thing. Well, it's only giving me 1 here. So let's do this. Rather than spawning from this one here, let's come down into here. Let's go to our game controller, and let's make sure this is the prefab from in our project window. And let's see if that does different. Let's see, we got one there. Let's see if we get another one. Our time's going down. Oh, I see what we didn't do. We never started this. So let's go back into here. And in our start, we've got to get that started. So we've got to start our coroutine. We never called spawn. There we go. So we have spawn, but we never called it. So we're going to start this coroutine here. Let's see if that fixes that. Oh yeah, we can see the clones on the side. Now, you can see there they're spawning. If I go to scene, you can see where they're spawning. Okay, so that's where our game object began. We put 0, 0, 0, and they're spawning right there. Okay, so now you could go in and do a couple things. One thing we can do is we can obviously wait a longer period of time to space those out. We can also randomize where we're spawning. So if we can always start it in the same X value, but we probably want to randomize the position here. So let's put random.range in here and put a range of values. So let's say we put 0. Why don't we put a range from like maybe, let's say -1 to 1. And we can also randomize how often they're spawning. And let's say they were awful close, so let's maybe go from 3 as our bottom value to maybe 5. All right, let's see what that looks like. I need another parenthesis here. Parentheses inside of parentheses. They're a little bit far apart, but we can make adjustments. You can adjust that as you need. Now, we had this first one that showed up at the beginning. I think we'd probably be better off now not having that and just starting here so they sort of have a more even spacing. Look at that thing spin. We're not going to have that anymore. Okay, good enough. All right, so our game is working with our obstacles being spawned. The next thing to do is to add a score. So we're going to add a score. Let's go up to UI and add text. It's going to create a canvas on our screen, which is the shape of our game, but way bigger. So we can make that size. So you have to scroll way out to see that. So we have our text here. I'm going to call this score text. And let's just put it at 0. I'd like to change it, make it a little bit bigger maybe. And we'll set the color of it to be maybe white. And I'm going to center that so you can kind of see where that's at. So you can see this whole box is the canvas of our game. So let's just kind of put that in the middle there. I think that'll work just fine. Okay, so to make this work, we had set within our full obstacle here. Let me open that up so you can see that we had this score here, and we put into the collider that it's a trigger. So we're going to put back into our player. I'm going to click out of here. Back into our player, we have this player controller script. And with that, we're going to check for when we hit that empty score box in between our obstacle, we're going to read that trigger. So let's go back into our player controller and let's add into here. Private void on trigger enter 2D. And you can see it's going to add this collider information in here. And what we want to do is we want to make something happen. So we want to add to the score. So let's go up here and let's create a score. Now I made that public, but it's not really necessary to do that because we're probably always started at 0. So let's just set that to private. That's not something we need to be able to change. Spell private properly. But we also do need that score text. So we're going to say public. And we're going to say text. And we're going to put score text. Now it didn't pop up in there because the UI isn't automatically included in the Unity libraries here. So we need to add that at the top with this using statement. So now what we want to do is when we come into here, we simply want to add one to the score and then have that displayed in our score text. So we go to the text property of our score text. We set that equal to the score. And because it's a integer, we're going to have to convert it to a string. So it just looks just like that. And now, when we come into Unity here, we can take this score text, and you can see that under here that we have with our player controller, now this score text shows up, and we need to tell it, hey, that's this. Okay? So as we play this now, as we go through, we should get an increase of our score each time we make it successfully through. Now, we don't have any consequence right now of going through and not making it through and touching anything else. So what we want to do now also is to have our player controller so that it also catches if we touch something else. So the only thing that's a trigger is our score sprite. Everything else, the ground or the obstacle, are set without isTrigger on their colliders. So those will actually come up with on collision 2D. So if we have on collision enter 2D, we are touching something that we don't want to touch. And basically we're just going to stop our game, which we can do with